chat, everyone. I'm Jim Dandino. I'm your returning host, joined by the steadfast John Odom, and we are talking about censorship of the vile pornography that is Mouse by Art Spiegelman. We're here with Carolyn Brennan, co-director of the Kellogg-Hubbard Library in Montpelier. Carolyn, welcome to the show. Can I bring you a giant box of comic books that I don't want anymore?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And second, yes, we have a perpetual book sale at the library, and for comic books specifically, I can think of a few people that would probably try very hard to paw through them before they made it down to the book sale.
That's what I figured. It was either that or try and build a weird little free library at the end of my street.
Sure, I mean, you could do that too.
Those aren't weird. I have a free library in my yard.
There's a half dozen or more of them in the city of Montpelier.
Yeah, no, they're all over the place. There's like 5 of them. I'm in the middle of the woods in Underhill, and there's like 5 or 6 on my way to the highway.
Yeah.
Which who drives past these, or who stops at a little free library on Brown's Trace Road in Jericho and says, "Ooh, let me go see what's in there." So
need to do some advertising, then you'll be.
Yep, comics.
Get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
If that actually works.
Yeah. Hey, kids, comics, right?
You want to see Batman in a really uncomfortable position? Okay, we're not keep talking about the Batman schwanz thing. So, Carolyn, thank you for coming and chatting with us. We are talking to you because you are a librarian, and it turns out that may put you on the front lines of the most recent censorship battles. How is everything going first?
I mean, everything at the KHL is going great. For us right now, we actually just, since you're talking about Mouse, we just got a number of additional copies of Mouse from a classroom teacher over at the high school. That Mouse is still part of the curriculum over there, but they're not reading it until March or April. And so because there's been increased interest because of this case in Tennessee, they kindly gave us a longer term loan of their multiple copy set so that we could respond to increased interest at our own library. So all of a sudden, as so frequently happens here, as some of these things get highlighted in the media or start to be under discussion, then we see our readers coming in and saying like, "Hey, I never read that before," or "Hey, I've never read a graphic novel before, but I'm really interested in this because there are people out there that think it's bad or think it should be restricted, and I want to form my own opinion," which is amazing. So we've actually recently seen an increased interest. And we always see a pretty healthy interest in banned books in general and books on diverse topics and difficult topics. And so it's been great. It's had the opposite effect at the KHL than what you would maybe see in some other places.
So what else are you seeing an uptick in besides Mouse? I mean, obviously, like Mouse is, the most appalling example and probably the most ignorant example of an attempted book banning.
That's quite a bar. I don't know. Most
really,
appalling, most ignorant. I don't know.
I mean, you're banning it's just, I don't understand how, I have a tough time personally understanding how people could find Mouse objectionable. I mean, I've got a 4-year-old and I wouldn't give it to her because it's a little bit much for a 4-year-old, but like a 10-year-old, it's an important way to learn about the Holocaust.
Well, and so you're getting at a little bit at what some of the arguments are for some of these materials. So you're talking about, like thematic appropriateness of a material for your child specifically. It's my professional opinion and my personal opinion that's up to parents and kids to have those discussions. And it's not up necessarily to the school board. It's not up to the library director to say like, no, nobody should read this item. But when you're talking about challenges, the challenges that you see are that the 3 most common ones that the American Library Association reports are that materials are sexually explicit, that they contain offensive language, and that they're unsuited to any age group. So those are like 1, 2, and 3, the top reasons that things are banned. And so then with Mouse, you were seeing there was a claim by this Tennessee school board that the material was sexually explicit because it shows the mom after she's committed suicide naked, and that it contained offensive language, specifically cursing at parents, that it was disrespectful to parents. So so what you're not seeing is that it's an objection to thinking about history critically, and there were not objections to it being a book about the Holocaust. You're seeing some of these. There are lots of people that are reading into the kind of the overarching reasons why this material is banned, but the ones that are getting stated are that it uses offensive language and that it's sexually explicit because, think of the children.
How much of this is just cover for anti-Semitism?
It could be. I don't know. I can't get into the people's heads that are making some of these challenges. We do see the majority of challenges coming from a more conservative viewpoint, although that's not all of them. And that's not the case at our library, which again is kind of an interesting juxtaposition for some of this. I do think that there are challenging discussions that people don't want to have, that they don't want to have with their kids. And there is a larger theme of this pushback against things like gender identity and things like critical race theory. And there are some of these kind of larger discussions. And when you hone this down to a local level, and when you hone it down to, a school board level, which is where we see most of these challenges happening, it becomes a lot easier to get down to where you're able to frame the conversation about race, or you're able to frame the conversation about gender just by what material is available to people. So if your MO is to stifle conversation or to only offer materials that support a very specific viewpoint and to make everything else unavailable, then you've really got, you can really kind of create the types of adults that you want to create by stifling free thought and free exchange of ideas. So I do think that there's a level of covering, or there's a level of larger issues going on for some of these more specific challenges. And I think that these are often very well thought out and very targeted. But what extent that's happening on any sort of individual level is very hard to say.
So I'm trying to think of how to phrase this, I guess not delicately, but diplomatically. And how do you pick through the good faith challenges and the bad faith challenges, right? Because like a lot of the distinction to me between like a parent who's genuinely concerned about their kids accidentally running into a dead mouse's boob,
sure,
and the parents who don't want their kids reading stories about Jews.
Mm-hmm.
What is driving this question for me is I had a run-in with a Polish nationalist recently, because in an article I wrote on Den of Geek, I talked about the Peacemaker from the TV show. His father in the comics ran a Nazi death camp in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
I referred to it as a Polish death camp, which is not 100% accurate, but it's also something that's being grabbed onto by right-wing, ultra right-wing Polish nationalists as a way to excuse their entire involvement in the Holocaust, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a form of kind of first level Holocaust revisionism, right? So, and like, for the guy reaching out to me, that like I kind of spotted bad faith right away, and I tend to assume bad faith on Twitter anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how do you kind of pick through? Do you have to give everybody the benefit of the doubt? Because of your role as a librarian, or is there stuff you're looking for that will tip you off when somebody has an ulterior motive that you kind of should be picking at a little bit more?
Sure. So I'll start out by saying that being a public librarian, the set of rules that we abide by are going to be very different or they're going to be somewhat different from a school curriculum, for the choices for a school curriculum, and they're going to be different from choices for a school library. So for a public library, the very best thing that you can do, well, first of all, you have a strong policy. The very best thing you can do is have a very strong collection development policy that says exactly how you identify what materials should be in your collection, and then it says very specifically how you remove materials from your collection. When you're writing policy as a librarian, you are writing for not the best scenario, but you're not writing for the worst scenario either. You really want to try to write your policies for kind of an average interaction at your library. So you don't want anything to be too restrictive, but you also don't want to assume that everybody is acting in good faith all the time, because they're not. So we have a wonderful collection development policy at the KHL, and it gives a number of criteria that we kind of grade books by, or movies or anything else that comes into the collection. And because we're a public library and we are meant to have a collection that supports every viewpoint that's expressed in our community, and because we're expected to have a range of materials from appropriateness for infants all the way up to appropriateness for, senior citizens and everything and everyone in between, we have a lot more leeway to be like, yes, we have, 50 Shades of Grey in our collection, but it's in the adult collection, and no, we're not going to restrict anybody from borrowing that based on their age. But at the same time, as a parent, it would be your responsibility if your 8-year-old brings this book home to be like, maybe this isn't the thing that you should be reading right now. Why don't you hand that over to mommy?
80% of this.
But so I think a strong policy is definitely, it's always the way to go. You have to treat every interaction that you have fairly. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're assuming that somebody's approaching you in good faith or bad faith. It means that it could be one or the other, but you're going to approach it fairly, and you're going to judge the material not based on whatever your own viewpoint is, but against a fair set of standards.
Okay. What are you seeing? What are you seeing the most challenges to? I know you're not a school librarian.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there's a little bit less of that happens here. Our most recent challenge actually was to a book in the Enola Holmes series. Yep. So yeah, and so a patron brought. There's a book in the Enola Holmes series. I think it might be the last one. I think it's the last book in the series, but it's called The Gypsy Goodbye. And so they objected to the use of the term gypsy right in the title of the book, and that could be considered offensive to Roma peoples. And so this was a person who was not, I believe, personally offended, but thought that this was a material that could make people or add to people feeling marginalized, or add to a marginalized view of a much larger and diverse group of people. And so it was a legitimate concern that was in good faith, but it was not somebody approaching it from a conservative viewpoint. It was somebody approaching from the other side of the political spectrum.
Yeah,
that's fascinating to me. And I was going to ask you, because you made that distinction earlier on. And, obviously, you're in Vermont, we're in Vermont. It's a different dynamic here than Tennessee, although, I'm sure you're plugged into the national zeitgeist about this as well. But there's an example. Are there other examples of challenges that you've encountered or are aware of that come more from the left? I'm extremely curious about that.
Yeah. So the other one, one of our other most recently challenged books was Unmasked, and the subtitle to that one is Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. That was a book that a patron had requested. It's a book that was written by someone with a very conservative viewpoint. And then we had another patron bring it to the desk and say, nobody should be able to read this. This is crap. It was not properly researched. This person has no credentials for being able to write on this topic. And they felt incredibly strongly that was not a valid nonfiction book to have in the nonfiction collection in their public library. So we do see that. And then we've had some more traditional challenges where I shouldn't say more traditional, but we have had challenges that have come also from a conservative viewpoint. For one I can think of was a picture book called Big Bob, Little Bob, which is about a child who is gender nonconforming. So, and the patron in that situation really, they didn't necessarily want the book removed from the collection, but they wanted us to put trigger warnings or stamps of some kind on books to show when they were LGBTQ thematic, so that parents could avoid them, with the specific thought that way parents could avoid them who didn't want to have those types of discussions with their children at that age.
I mean, labeling gay stuff has a long tradition of not being cool.
Yeah. So, but that was the request that was put in front of us. And then we've had materials by Muslim women authors be challenged because they expressed a non-traditional viewpoint towards their own faith. Yep. And yeah, those are the types of things we see. So they run the gamut. And we've had challenges for holiday books. I can think of challenges we had fairly recently for Thanksgiving books that showed the version of the Thanksgiving story that I grew up with, that you guys probably grew up with, and that excludes the treatment of Native American and Indigenous peoples, and
right.
Yeah, exactly, and it presents a very, very one-sided view of the Thanksgiving story that, probably never actually happened. And so we've had I think all of our challenges have been in good faith. They've all been from a position of somebody's legitimate concern about what our collection represents, and whether or not it's accurate and timely and thematically appropriate. And so, yeah, those are the types of things that we see at the KHL.
It seems like the more appropriate challenge would be challenging you to include more of something rather than to exclude. I mean, that mindset, that mindset coming from the left, I find kind of baffling, since with the history, and given that it's the press we're getting about Maus. I mean, this is generally something that's considered to be done by the right. And I just baffles me that there isn't that self-consciousness, self-awareness among folks on the left to not go there.
I disagree to an extent. I mean, I'm not going to put Carolyn in a position where she has to defend Ben Shapiro or anything. But I think we've seen from what happened to Richard Spencer, for example, that deplatforming these people is the way to actually take them out. You're not going to beat them in open debate. You're not going to beat them on the marketplace of ideas, right? Because the marketplace of ideas incentivizes whoever shouts the loudest. You beat them by cutting their money off. And so that's where some of, like, the made up the fiction book about Antifa, I'm sympathetic to that challenge. I don't necessarily think that it's the library's job to decide whether or not to shelf that book. But, a lot of this also comes down to, watch what your kids are reading. Like, pay attention to your children, right? Like, if I don't want my kid reading a book, then I'm not going to let her have it. And, if I feel like subject matter for my kid is too advanced or not something that I want to have a conversation about, then I just make sure that she doesn't read the stuff that, that has values that I don't think that I want her imprinting on her, right? And a lot of these challenges, it sounds like, are people, some of these challenges are people who don't want to have tough conversations with their kids for whatever reason, because they don't want to have conversations about slurs for Roma people. They don't want to have conversations about the ways that our national myth is 50 to 75% bullshit. That they don't want to have conversations with their kids about gender nonconforming people, right? Like the trick here, the one neat trick to solving this problem is for people to pay attention to their kids.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Have conversations.
Well, there's a lot of that sort of whose responsibility is it to raise my child? So there's the whole argument of it takes a village and versus personal responsibility. But anytime you're talking about taking something out of a school curriculum, you're talking about a small group of people who are paying hyper attention, then dictating what everybody else's experience is like, and taking away that individual responsibility. And I agree with you completely. I think as a librarian and as a parent, I think it's your parental responsibility. If you have concerns about what your child is reading, then look at it, read it for yourself, figure out like how it aligns with or challenges your own values, and then think about that critically and think about whether or not that's a conversation worth having with your kid, or if maybe they're not ready for it yet, but they'll be ready down the road. Mm-hmm. I think the only time I'm completely anti-censorship. I can think of like one time when I censored material for my kids, and it was when like the first time they were preschool age, and I was reading them Harry Potter for the first time. And Harry Potter, we can have a whole other discussion about that, certainly, and J.K. Rowling and all of that. But so we were reading The Chamber of Secrets, and I've got like a 4-year-old that I'm reading a bedtime story to. And so I didn't want when the basilisk is going through the hallways of Hogwarts and going like, kill, kill. I was like, oh, he's saying cookies. I want cookies. Because I wanted to read something that I found interesting and would enjoy reading out loud to my kids. But I didn't necessarily want to send my like 4-year-old off to bed with that in their head.
Yep. I did the same.
But it wasn't like the school's job, my kids' preschool's job or my public library's job to be like, you might not want to read that to your child. It was my job to review the content and then make that choice on my own.
Right. I had the same thing happen this weekend. I was solo parenting with a 4-year-old and a 7-month-old. I put on a Coheed and Cambria concert on YouTube. We're bouncing around the living room to it. And the guy drops the F-bomb in between 2 songs. And I'm like, oh, sweetheart, they're going to say some bad words in this. And I don't want you to repeat them. And she goes, yeah, like stupid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. They say that in one of the songs. You shouldn't say that.
But those are the types of conversations. And I've done that with my kids too. And I've been really upfront with them. Like there is a time and a place for specific language and specific conversations. And part of growing up is learning the time and the place for some of those things. And I gotta say, my kids are both, I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader now. And I just went, last weekend, I went to a Ghost concert. I don't know if you know the band Ghost. They're a metal band. They paint their faces, they wear masks. They're great. You should totally check them out. And they're wonderful. And so now that I have a 15-year-old, I'm like, don't you want to go to a concert? And my 15-year-old is like, Mom, I listen to like indie electronic type music. She's like, I don't want to listen to heavy metal with you, Mom. And I'm like, oh.
We are an emphatic baby metal household. So I caught her humming Holy Diver the other day.
Yes, there you go. That's a classic.
Yep, very clever. So Ghost is going on the list. Thank you for the recommendation.
Yes, yeah, check them out.
All sorts of cool stuff that you should listen to.
Yep.
And read.
Back on topic. I'm taking us back to topic.
Good.
Wandering, rambling people. So you talked about having a good policy in place, for dealing with challenges, for taking people at least on how they present as their own terms. Mm-hmm. Now, looking around the country, because I don't see it happening here, although you never know, what kind of policy can you have that then helps you when it's not an individual person and you're talking about a mob? What's the mob policy?
Sure. I can speak to that personally from a situation that did happen at the library, but I think my recommendation for something like a school board would be, or for curriculum, you have professionals that are meant to coordinate and validate your curriculum. And so you have to look to those people who have the professional expertise. And I think you have to have I think even with a mob, you need to have a similar policy, and you need to be careful not to engage in somebody's specific arguments, because as Jim was saying earlier, it's really hard to fight against those specific arguments. So what you really need to do is say, like, thank you, we've listened to your viewpoint, and we're going to review this against our own already long established procedure and weigh it against that and make a decision. And so the thing that happened, the instance of censorship that happened at the library that was close to that. And this was now I hesitate to bring it up because it was now a number of years ago, but we hosted Drag Queen Story Hour at our library, and it was for the 2nd year in a row. And so typically if you're going to see a challenge to a library program, or if it's not going to be well attended or something like that, that happens like the first time you offer it, not the second time. We had a great, awesome experience the first time we offered it. And so my youth programming librarian approaches me, and she's like, hey, I'd like to do Drag Queen Story Time again. And I was like, was it successful last year? And she's like, yeah, it was great. It was really well received. Lots of people showed up. I'm like, awesome, do it again. And it got put out on social media, not by us, but by the national organization that started Drag Queen Story Times.
Mm-hmm.
And it got picked up by this like ultra conservative Facebook personality that has 700,000 followers and said, oh my gosh, in the capital of Vermont, they're doing one of these drag queen story times. And, and they had a very specific and very, very misinformed idea about what that was and what that meant. And they gave the personal names and contact information, business contact information for the library, and said, okay, my little soldiers, you call them and you tell them that we don't want this kind of pornographic content being force fed to our children at their public library. And we got thousands. We spent a week fielding thousands of phone calls from people from all over the country, some people, and I will say a lot of people who were really calling in good faith because they did not understand what drag queen storytime was. And they were people of devout personal faith where they just didn't get it. They didn't understand. They really thought that we were forcing children to go to programs. They had no idea that a public library program is something you can be like, yeah, I'm going to skip this one and maybe go to the next one instead. And so we did a lot of explaining that. We did a lot of explaining of like how the library is funded and like what kinds of programs we offer, and that this was one out of 250 programs that we offer over the course of the year. And so anyway, so that's how we combated that mob. I mean, it was individual phone calls, but it was constant for such a long time. And every single one of them, we said, thank you for calling. We are taking calls of local concern and support at this time. May I ask where you're calling from? Because we differentiated really quickly, like who had a voice in that debate and who did not. And we don't craft library programs based on a national level necessarily. We're creating programs that speak to our local community, and we do try to have programs that speak to everybody's point of view. Not every program speaks to everybody's point of view, but there is a program for everybody at the library. And so we did a lot of that explaining. And I tried to field as many of those calls as I possibly could so that my librarians didn't have to answer them. So we kind of got a script. We were really clear about whose voice we wanted to hear. We combated it with information about like, this is what this program is. This is how it fits into our scheme of programming. This is how we decide it. And then we were asked a lot, like, what would it take to not offer the program? And I said, well, it would have to, if nobody showed up, if it wasn't successful, then we won't offer it again. So anyway, I think that anticipating to the extent that you can, a larger national or mob type response to something. I think the more you can anticipate that, the better. And I still think having a clear policy, a clear plan of action, and not rising to the individual arguments. I think those are kind of the main strategies that I would recommend that anybody employ in that sort of situation.
Boy, that type of mob. When I brought up mob, I was thinking of the Tennessee, the school district, and that's a mob with their own biases, their own agenda. But then there's also the mobs you described, which are mobs that are geographically spread out, where the objective is not just to keep this out of your community, but to stomp it out everywhere.
That's right.
And that's
to a certain extent to gum up library resources, dealing with that stuff so that the library isn't able to deal with anything else, right? But it sounds like you guys had a plan, and it sounds like you guys dealt with it the best possible way you could have. I mean, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it wasn't something that we could have really anticipated, because usually, I mean, we're a little library in the smallest state capital in the nation. We don't get a lens put on us in that way. And I think in some ways with a lot of these challenges, it's worth noting that a lot of the challenges that are made to library materials over the course of a year, the ALA sees something like 300 plus challenges that get submitted to them, that get reported to them for materials every single year. They get between 300 and 400.
And 2021 was particularly high, and just in the fall they received that many, just in the fall of the year. But out of all of those challenges, there are significantly less that lead to actual banning, where they're followed through and those materials are actually removed. So I think it's worth highlighting this in sort of our national discourse, because we need to think as communities we need to anticipate some of these challenges, and we need to think about the ways that we're going to respond to them if and when they happen here. But I also think that highlighting this in the media, like what some of these folks are really looking for, is to create a national conversation and create a platform for their point of view. And then when you start responding to their specific arguments, then you're legitimizing their concerns. The minute you respond to it, you're beginning to say like, oh, okay, this is actually something that's worth talking about, instead of being like, get out of here. Like, you don't get to pick what books are in the curriculum. Like, we have people we pay to do that.
Right.
Ouch.
Yeah. So.
Right. The bigger problem would be a bunch of cranks running for the library board.
That's exactly right. And I think that we've seen that happen, and we're going to see that happen certainly on the national stage. You see people then starting to run for positions, and the minute like you get disinterested in local politics, that's where a lot of these changes start. That's where a lot of these changes happen.
Yep.
And we could end up with a library board that and our board is a policy making board. You know, I can't imagine that it would ever, well, I shouldn't say that, but you have a policy. Yeah, you have a policy making board. So if you get people running for those positions, or we see so many races now that are unopposed, if you get people that are just stepping into them because they're the only person that wants to do that local government job, there's a lot of power to make changes on a local level that have much larger implications.
That's going to keep happening as long as people are paying more attention to main Senate races than they are on school boards.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so give us the hot list here. What are people really going after these days? What are the targets?
What is the best banned book that you can recommend?
The best banned book. Well, I can certainly tell you some of the heavy hitters. So
sure.
the frequent challenges. So the top 10 for 2020, the 2021 numbers haven't come out yet because we're so recently into 2021. But we've got a lot of them are books about race, and a lot of them are books about gender identity. So we've got George by Alex Gino, which was challenged for LGBTQ content and for conflicting with the challenger's religious viewpoint. We've got Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism in You, specifically the version that was made for younger readers. All American Boys by Jason Reynolds, which was drug use, profanity, anti-police views, which I find a very interesting challenge. We've got Speak by Lori Halse Anderson because it included rape and profanity. Do you want me to keep going? I can go all the way through the top 10 if you want.
Yeah.
Right. Let's hear the top 10.
Sure. All right. We've got The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, which has been challenged for a number of years. That book's by Sherman Alexie. And that was for sexual situations and allegations now against the author. The next one is Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice by Marianne Celino and others. And that one is divisive language and anti-police views. We've got To Kill a Mockingbird, which shows up on the banned books list over and over and over and over again.
People are phoning that one in. That's just gotten just routine.
Well, and that one, though, interestingly, so that's the, obviously like racial slurs and whatnot, but also because it has a character in it that's a white savior. So it's so there's some other points of view going into that one also. Of Mice and Men is another one that's challenged. It's on the most challenged list this year, but again, it's frequently on there, and that's also for racist stereotypes. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, And that's because it depicts child sexual abuse. And then The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas is on there this year also. So, and again, for anti-police messaging and for profanity.
And then, so no gender, this is 2020 though, so genderqueer is going to be on the 2020 list probably, right?
I assume that that's going to be on the 2021 list, yeah. And you see a lot of books, you see a lot of gender identity books, but you also see a lot of puberty books, because there are an awful lot of parents that don't want their kids learning about puberty and about how their bodies work, or they want to really frame that discussion in a certain way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we still keep, I don't know that we do now, but up until pretty recently, we had some puberty books that had had explicit imagery, because they're puberty books, they have to show body parts to be scientifically accurate.
Right.
But we had to keep them behind the desk in the children's library because they would get stolen.
Wow.
And I don't know if they were getting stolen to censor them, or if they were getting stolen because there were people that wanted to read them that didn't want to report that they were reading them.
Right.
So, and I'll never know.
I feel like being reminded that To Kill a Mockingbird and Of Mice and Men are on here, it's a nice way of reminding us that this fight is not actually new.
That's right. Yeah.
That this isn't a 2021 or a 2022 phenomenon. This is something that has been going on for decades and will go on for decades, and it's something that we have to remain vigilant about. Yeah,
well, the freedom to read statement from the American Library Association that deals with intellectual freedom, I mean, that's been around for decades.
And didn't they just do a new one too, or an updated?
They did, yeah. They update it pretty frequently, and they did an amended version to talk about diversity not that long ago. But I just looked it up. The original adoption date was 1953. So we've been talking about freedom to read, and we've been talking about censorship, as long as publishers have been publishing books.
Right. Damn Gutenberg.
Yeah.
Nothing but trouble since that guy came along.
Well, I think you can go back to Saint Jerome and the Vulgate. The minute you started translating the Bible into Latin that any guy could read.
Yeah,
start getting ideas, and then what happens?
People are thinking for themselves, and then
it's the worst.
Then the peasants get their ideas, and we're in trouble.
Exactly.
How often do you know of that librarians themselves have become the targets?
Oh gosh. Recently that's certainly happening, because you're seeing school librarians and you're seeing public librarians then engaging in some of these meetings where challenges are occurring. And so then their jobs are getting threatened, because they're defending the right to read diverse content to students. They're creating that opposition and being the ones to engage with some of those arguments that are being made. So yes, definitely, that's happening now. Anytime you refuse to remove an item from your library, you're getting judged by the person who is asking you to agree with their point of view. So I think that happens to all of us at one time or another, to a greater or to a lesser extent. But I think it's happening more now as more of these serious and coordinated challenges are happening. The librarians are the ones that are standing up as opposing it. And in that case, yeah, their jobs are getting, but I mean, school librarian and public librarians' jobs have been threatened just because of lack of funding and lack of support across the country for a long time now. And you're seeing, I think there was a case, it was out west somewhere pretty recently. I don't remember which state it was. It's slipping my mind at the moment, but where there was a library board that they ended up firing their librarian and then hiring somebody who was not from an ALA, from an American Library Association accredited school, because they were starting to see that, or their point of view was that the American Library Association itself was an advocacy organization that was kind of behind and coordinating all of these like divisive materials, or what they thought are divisive materials, being made available to their community. And so they went a step further and reorganized. Their state withdrew their state level funding, which is not a thing we have in Vermont, but is a thing they have in other states. And they took it and they said, we're not going to take state funding, and we're going to have a library and a librarian that has nothing to do with the ALA. which is a kind of a fascinating additional extreme example of librarians coming under fire and some of these places being reorganized and refunded.
I feel like that was Idaho.
Probably. I mean, that sounds right. It was somewhere out in somewhere out in the Northwest. Yeah.
It seems like an Idaho thing to do.
Yeah, we'll just pick Idaho.
I'm just going to pick on Idaho.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll do that.
East Oregon.
Yeah.
This has been really, really interesting. I love this.
Yes.
And while we've got you here, you're a gamer. What are you playing these days?
I am doing a second run through of Witcher 1 right now and on PC. And I'm doing probably a third or a fourth run through of Fallout 4 at this very moment. So my favorite, I played World of Warcraft for 8 years straight as a gnomish warrior. I was a tank, little tiny gnome tank with little pigtails. She was great. I played her until I couldn't possibly play her anymore. And then of course, like I pretty recently I was playing Skyrim, but I'm back on the Witcher games. I'm going to play through 1, 2, and 3 again. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through 1. So yeah, but I'm a massive PC gamer. And I was playing my 15-year-old that I mentioned before. She gets all of these indie games off of Steam. Mm-hmm. And so she just played through this game called Carrion, where it's fascinating. So it's, instead of like being the hero fighting the monster, you're the monster that's like escaped in this subterranean lab and you're trying to like make your way through to the surface. And so it's all like tentacles and talons and things, and it's a side scroller. That was wonderful. So I didn't get to play that one, but I watched her play that one, and I had a blast enjoying that vicariously. So she gets me into some of these more indie games. I'm much more of a traditional role-playing game PC gamer.
Well, you're helping us out here because the podcast has a video game title, but we just never talk about video games because we don't talk about video games. We do talk about video games.
I mean, anytime you want to talk about PC gaming specifically, I don't do as much console gaming, but yeah, I can get pretty deep into the mythology of The Witcher, or certainly of anything Morrowind connected, anything Skyrim-y, like,
That's a massive blind spot for me because I think I tried a Witcher game and it was so incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And I personally have problems with open world.
Sure.
I need a little bit of direction.
Well, I mean, there is. So Witcher 1 has, because it's an older game, it has more rails to it. So so that's more one quest follows the next quest. And you get there are a couple places where you get stuck because you can't advance in like the main quest chain until you do some side quests.
Right.
But that one's a little bit easier. But I know a lot of people that get bogged down in Witcher 3 in the Wild Hunt because it's such an open world. But it has a main quest line that you can follow. Like the thing I like about Witcher, and the thing that I like actually about Skyrim too, there's a lot of moral ambiguity in them. You have to make a lot of decisions. And like in The Witcher, they frame it as like picking the lesser evil.
Right.
And I find that a really interesting exploration. And then in Skyrim, depending on the types of interactions you have with the characters that you meet, the NPCs that you meet in the world, their reaction to you will be really, really different. So you can play through, it has huge replayability, either of those, because there's so much variation on kind of how you can play your character.
Yeah.
That I really enjoy. And then, you go into Whiterun in Skyrim. And if you've played like an evil character that's been mean to everybody the whole time, like people like quail in fear when you walk by, which is awesome. But then you can also play as like a great, law abiding, super like heroic character. And then they go in and they fall at your feet and like worship you. And it's just fascinating to play it either way, or play some variation in the middle and watch the game change around you.
Oh, that's great.
That was me in Mass Effect.
God, if we had more time, I'd say let's combine these topics and talk about Gamergate.
Well, I know you were you were telling me how a lot of your conversations devolve into discussions of Star Trek.
Yes, they do. Star Trek always comes up one way or the other.
Well, so I have a Star Trek a quasi germane to Star Trek thing that also relates to banned books. So just recently on The Daily Show, LeVar Burton was on The Daily Show. And in his capacity as having been the host of Reading Rainbow for so many years, and he is talking about banned books specifically, and he starts reading these lovely picture books that are banned books, and he gets cut off like on the first page of each of these picture books, and then at the end he's like, read the books they don't want you to read. And I just, I love LeVar Burton from being from Reading Rainbow and from being Geordie LaForge. So
what's not the love? Kunta.
Jeopardy host that should have been.
Exactly. Everything he does, everything he touches is magical.
Yeah. They should make him the Packers quarterback.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, just replace all the bad Aaron Rodgers is with him. Yep. Carolyn, this has been a wonderful conversation. We're going to put you on the list for the panel discussion about video games whenever we actually get to it.
Awesome.
Or maybe we'll do a bonus episode where we all play together and then just release the video.
I mean, are we going to play something that's cooperative play? Or are we going to play something that's like, are we going to play like Castle Crashers or like Lovers in a Dangerous Space Time? Or are we going to play something where like Street Fighter and we just see who comes out on top?
I mean, the only things that I am probably even remotely capable of playing against people are the fighting games. So yeah. I might have to take one for the team there.
I vote for, if we're going to play a fighting game, a versus fighting game, I'm going to vote for like the X-Men game that came out for the PS2, just because that's the one I'm personally the best at. And I can play as Toad, and he has the best catchphrases in the whole thing.
I vaguely remember that game. Oh my God.
That's a Rise of the, no. I can't remember this game. I'm not a poor Capcom fighting game partisan. So like Marvel Capcom 2.
Yeah, there you go.
It is the greatest video game of all time to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it was like the movie costumes, right?
It was, yeah, from like the one of the first movies that came out. And I can remember playing. I played it with my ex-husband. That was like right when we were. What is it? X-Men Dimensions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
We played the heck out of that. It's a great game.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. No, we gotta find a copy of this and play it.
All right. There you go. It's a plan.
I can help with that.
You still have one?
my ex-husband, who I'm very good friends with still, he has that PS2 and our copy of the game that we used to play. So I bet you he'd loan it out. I'm pretty sure we have 4 controllers too.
All right. Thank you so much for
awesome.
Joining, Carolyn.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, as always, for listening, and thanks to the amazing Christopher Piatek for our theme music.